you hear good things.
It was a Monday morning in suburban Plano, Texas, November 22nd, 2004. The kind of morning where nothing should happen. But at 9:43 a.m., a 911 call came in from a daycare center. The director said something was off, deeply off. A mother they knew well, Dena Schlosser, had called them. Her voice was strange, calm, detached. And what she said shook them so badly, they didn't hesitate. They called the police. Moments later, the 911 dispatcher placed a call to Dena herself. He asked if there was an emergency. And she replied gently, yes. Then a pause. And she added, I cut her arms off. When first responders arrived at the apartment, they found Dena in the living room, covered in blood, holding a large kitchen knife, sitting cross-legged on the carpet. In the background, Christian hymns played from a stereo. Her eyes were steady. Her voice was quiet. She wasn't screaming. She wasn't crying. She was singing. In the back bedroom, her 10-month-old daughter, Margaret, lay dying in her crib. Her arms had been severed at the shoulders. There were no signs of a struggle. No sign the baby had ever made a sound. Dena didn't try to run. She didn't try to explain. She had followed a command. A voice, she said, sent straight from God. This wasn't a crime scene born out of hate. It wasn't revenge or rage. It was something else. Delusion, madness, or something that scared even professionals to say out loud. This is a story about a mother, about a baby, about the quiet horror of untreated postpartum psychosis, and what happens when the system decides you're safe until you're not. I'm Sidney Smith, and this is Murderous Podcast. This week's Murderous is Dena Schlosser. In episode 90, the hymn, the knife, and the baby named Margaret. Before she was the woman in the headlines, before the blood-soaked 911 call or the national outcry that followed, Dena was a church-going mother of three, a woman who played Christian hymns in her living room while folding laundry, who rocked her youngest daughter to sleep each night in a modest Plano, Texas apartment. She was born in 1969 and raised in a home marked by strict faith and, according to some accounts, harsh parenting. She struggled with depression most of her life. But when her youngest child, Margaret, was born in January of 2004, Dena's world began to quietly unravel. The warning signs were there. 6 days after giving birth, she left the apartment abruptly, ran out into the street, leaving baby Margaret alone. A neighbor called the police. Child Protective Services intervened. Dena was hospitalized briefly for what doctors identified as postpartum psychosis, a rare but severe mental health condition marked by delusions and detachment from reality. After a short stay, she was released. CPS monitored the family, made visits, and asked the usual questions. But by August, the case was closed. She was considered stable. She'd gone back to her routine, back to the hymns, the baby bottles, the stillness. But inside Dena's mind, something was growing louder. Delusions that twisted scripture, a sense of urgency, a belief that the end was near. She became fixated on a news story about a boy mauled by a lion, convinced it was a sign of the apocalypse. And she began hearing things she believed came from God. Not whispers, commands. On the morning of November 22nd, 2004, she picked up a kitchen knife, walked into the bedroom, and did something no one, not her family, not her pastor, not even her husband, ever imagined was possible. By the time police arrived, she was calm, sitting, covered in blood, still holding the knife, still singing the hymn. At 9:43 a.m., a call came into the Plano Police Department. But it didn't come from Dena. It came from her husband's workplace. Dena Schlosser had just gotten off the phone with Dena. What she said to him didn't register as real. Not at first. But something in her voice stopped him cold. "I cut the baby's arms off," she said. John hung up, panicked, and called the daycare their older daughters attended. She asked someone there to go check on his wife. The daycare called 911. The dispatcher phoned Dena next. When she picked up, there was no panic in her voice, only that same gospel song, "He Touched Me," playing softly in the background. "Is there an emergency?" the operator asked. Dena paused, then replied, "Yes." Exactly what happened? Her answer was clear. "I cut her arms off." Officers were dispatched immediately. They arrived at the modest apartment complex off Independence Parkway just minutes later. What they found inside would haunt them for years. Dena was covered completely in blood, all over her clothes, with that large kitchen knife. She was singing. She was humming. She was detached. In the back bedroom, they found baby Margaret, just 10 months old, lying in her crib, her arms severed. She was still alive, but just barely. Paramedics rushed her to the hospital. She died shortly after arrival. As word spread through the department and then the town, officers struggled to understand what they'd just seen. This wasn't a violent break in. There was no intruder, no apparent struggle, no history of drug use or abuse. This was a mother alone with her baby. A woman who had told the responding officers she was giving the child to God. At first, the public assumed drugs, then maybe a mental break, some unthinkable snap. But the truth, what would come out slowly, painfully, over the course of 2 criminal trials, was even more disturbing because Dena had a history, and she wasn't unknown to the system. Before the murder made headlines, before Texas Child Protective Services was dragged under national scrutiny, there were warnings. Dena had always seemed a little fragile, but in a way that makes people speak in whispers, not act. She was born in 1969, raised in upstate New York. Her family was described as religious, devout. By the time she reached adulthood, she had left home, earned a degree in psychology, and eventually moved to Texas, where she married John. To outsiders, they looked like a stable couple, suburban, quiet. They attended Water of Life Church in Plano, a charismatic fundamentalist congregation led by a controversial preacher named Doyle Davidson. Davidson preached loudly about demons, obedience, and spiritual warfare. Some called him controlling. To Dena, he was prophetic. She and John had 3 daughters, 2 older, and then baby Margaret, who was born in 2004. And that's when things began to unravel. According to court records and mental health evaluations, Dena spiraled quickly after Margaret's birth in January. She was diagnosed with postpartum psychosis, a rare but severe condition that causes delusions, hallucinations, and detachment from reality. In the weeks after the birth, she became erratic. Neighbors reported seeing her wandering outside, confused and barefoot, with her infant left behind in the apartment. On one occasion, her 5-year-old daughter had to chase her mother down the street. That incident triggered a CPS investigation. Caseworkers visited. Dena was hospitalized briefly. Doctors flagged signs of psychosis. But after several weeks of outpatient counseling and medication, the case was closed in August of 2004. The official line: Dena no longer posed a threat to her children. But she wasn't well. In the fall of 2004, something shifted. According to psychiatric testimony, Dena became obsessed with religious imagery. She interpreted television, news as messages from God. One story about a lion attacking a child she believed was a sign of the coming apocalypse. She told doctors that God was commanding her. first to remove her baby's arms, then her own. She confided this to her husband more than once. She told him she wanted to give the baby to God, that she was being called. But John didn't report it. Later, under oath, he admitted he thought she was just emotional, troubled, but not dangerous. He told the court, "I didn't think she'd actually do anything. I thought she was just struggling. I didn't want to push her over the edge." It was a mistake he would live with for the rest of his life. And so Dena went untreated, unmonitored, unmedicated. Her delusions intensified, fueled by religious obsession, mental illness, and isolation. And 3 months after CPS closed the case, she would pick up a knife and follow through on what she believed was a divine instruction. If you could be a fly on the wall in that apartment the morning of November 22nd and see the scene that I have described, Dena sitting on the couch, first responders arriving, she covered in blood, baby Margaret with her arms severed at her shoulders, you could completely understand why detectives and officers, hardened professionals, were visibly shaken. One would later say, "This is something you don't come back from." And I have no doubt about that at all. Because just researching this story, reading this story right now, is a little tough for me, to be honest with you. I almost did not do this one. And when you look back on it while you're reading it right now, or while you're hearing it and you're envisioning it, one of the amazing parts of all of this, I guess, and it shouldn't be, given what her diagnosis had been at the time, was Dena was one of the surprising things. Not just because of what she did, but she never fled. She never denied it. She never seemed surprised by what she'd done. When asked why she did it, she told doctors and investigators a version that would become central to her defense. God told her to. Psychiatrist Dr. David Sif later testified that Dena had interpreted a news segment. And with that, her mind went straight to the end times were here, and she believed God was commanding her to act. She said she was to cut off Margaret's arms and her own to give them to God. This was a religious psychosis, a full-blown break from reality. And this was brought on by that postpartum mental illness that I personally had never heard of before I started looking at doing this story. But we've already kind of covered pieces here and there, but the signs had been there. Earlier that year, CPS caseworker had been called because Dena had been running down the street. She had been put into a hospital. diagnosed with the postpartum psychosis, and then later released with a treatment plan. But that plan wasn't followed closely enough. And no one believed she was a danger, not then. She had two other daughters, ages 6 and 9, who were at school when all of this happened. Thank God, because they were unharmed, but removed from the home immediately. And Dena would never see them again. Her husband later testified that he had seen the signs, that she had once talked about giving the baby to God, that she had harmed herself before, that she was slipping further into a delusional world, this guy. But no one stopped her. And because of that, Dena acted on what she believed. Not out of hatred, not out of anger, but out of terrifying absolute certainty that she was doing what God wanted. The question now was why, and whether the state of Texas would see Dena as a killer or a woman lost to madness. The trial of Dena Schlosser wasn't about whether she did it. She did. She had told the 911 operator, I cut her arms off. She told police. She told the EMTs. She told the psychiatrist. And she didn't say it in some kind of frenzy. She said it with chilling calm as gospel hymns played softly in the background. And growing up in the church, that is definitely one of the parts that stands out to me. I don't know about anyone else who may be listening to this, if that's something that hangs on in your memory when you listen to this story. The trial held in McKinney, Texas, was about why. Was she evil? Or was she insane? The courtroom fell silent as one expert after another took the stand. Not to describe a monster, but a woman entirely untethered from reality. Her psychiatrist testified that Dena suffered from postpartum psychosis, a rare and severe mental illness sometimes triggered by childbirth. And the signs had been there. Earlier that year, she'd been hospitalized after running barefoot. She had been prescribed medication. But in the months leading up to the murder, those medications were either stopped or changed. And her husband, John, later admitted that he'd missed or ignored the signs. The defense pointed to her delusions. She believed God was commanding her. They talked about the news report of the child mauled by a lion and what she interpreted that as the apocalypse. That she said to her husband just days earlier, I want to give the baby to Doyle. I want to give the baby to God. She thought she was saving her daughter's soul. But the prosecution argued she knew what she was doing. They said she'd first called her husband, not 911. That she washed the knife. That she sat down. She turned on that gospel music that I keep referencing and waited. They played the full 911 call in court. Dispatcher, what happened? Dena, I cut her arms off. Dispatcher, is she breathing? Dena, no. Dispatcher, why did you do this? Dena, because I had to. I had to. The jury was asked to decide just one thing. Did she know it was wrong at the time? That's the legal standard for insanity in Texas. The first jury couldn't agree. They deadlocked. Mistrial. A second trial followed, this time decided by a judge. And in April 2006, Judge Chris Oldner handed down the verdict. Not guilty by the reason of insanity. Dena was committed to Rusk State Hospital and then later transferred to Terrell State Hospital, where she would remain under state supervision, possibly for the rest of her life. Outside the courtroom, there was no victory, just the quiet grief of a family destroyed, a justice system struggling to balance mental illness against irreversible harm. Her husband divorced her. Their surviving daughters were placed in his custody. And Dena? A court order barred her from ever contacting her children again. But the case wasn't over. In late 2008, doctors said Dena has stabilized. She was taking her medication, attending therapy, compliant, and they filed a recommendation for outpatient release. The judge agreed, but under strict conditions. Weekly psychiatric appointments, medication compliance, physician-approved birth control, no unsupervised contact with children, ongoing monitoring by the state. She was released quietly. No press conference, no headlines. Until 2010. That's when firefighters in Richardson spotted a woman walking barefoot down the street at 2 a.m. It was Dena. She wasn't violent. She wasn't hallucinating. But she had violated her release, unsupervised, possibly off treatment. A judge ordered her recommitted. She remained in the hospital until she was again deemed stable. Eventually, she was re-released, still under the care of doctors and the watchful eye of the state. And she returned to civilian life. No prison record, not on parole, no felony conviction. By law, Dena was a woman who had been mentally ill, treated, and cleared to rejoin society. But the public saw something else. They saw a woman who killed her child and walked free. By 2012, Dena Schlosser was no longer Dena Schlosser. She was going by a new name, Dena Leitner, living quietly in outpatient care, still under psychiatric supervision, but free. And she had a job, a customer service associate at a Walmart in Terrell, Texas. It might have gone unnoticed, if not for one customer. A woman recognized her. Not from school, not from church, from the news, from the crime that shook North Texas to its core. She'd been in line, chatting with the cashier when she realized who it was. And when word got out, it spread like wildfire. Dena, the mother who amputated her baby's arms in a religious delusion, was bagging groceries and checking receipts at a local Walmart. The backlash was immediate. Parents were outraged. Customers were stunned. The internet lit up with disbelief and fury. She should never be around families, one woman told a local news crew. She murdered a child. Reporters called Walmart for comment, and Walmart responded. All associates must pass a criminal background check as a condition of employment. If a charge does not result in a conviction, we have no way of knowing an applicant's previous criminal charges. They weren't lying. Dena had no criminal conviction. She had been found not guilty by reason of insanity. And because of that verdict, there was no felony on her record. So yes, she passed the background check. But the public pressure didn't stop. Walmart terminated her employment shortly after the story broke. No press release, no apology, just a quiet exit out the back of the store that for a brief moment became ground zero for the ethics of reintegration. Was she a rehabilitated woman doing her best to rebuild? Or was she a danger who never should have been cleared for work, especially not around families? Illegally, she was allowed to live in the community. She was still under psychiatric review, monitored by doctors, with her outpatient status overseen by the state. But to the public, it didn't matter. They remembered what she had done, not the diagnosis that followed. And the idea that she might stand behind them in line or hand them change at a register was just too much to bear. You've been listening to a production of Sidney Smith Creative, LLC, and the You Hear Good Things podcast network, all rights reserved. For more true crime stories that stay with you, follow Murders Podcast on your favorite platform and join the community on Patreon for early access, bonus content, and deeper cuts. And don't forget to also leave us a 5-star review on Apple. Believe it or not, it goes a long way. What do you make of this one? Was it the hymn in the background? The 911 call? The fact that Dena eventually walked free, got a job, stood behind a register? Do you believe she should have been reintegrated into society? Or should some crimes be too much to come back from? I think that's where I'm leaning. And what does justice look like when a mother kills not out of rage, but delusion? As always, I want to hear what stuck with you. And again, leave a review on Apple or Castbox. Follow the show on Spotify or iHeart so you never miss a Thursday drop. And if this one left you quiet, send me a DM. The link's right there in the episode description, right at the top. You are the quiet jury, and your verdict matters. Until next time, stay curious, stay cautious.